Imagine a cold morning fog lifting as dawn breaks over St. Petersburg in the mid-19th century. Majestic facades and granite embankments stand watch in silence over deserted streets. The year is 1860, and the capital of the Russian Empire presents itself as proud and magnificent, but life itself seems to have frozen within its boundaries. An eerie, unnatural stillness reigns. According to official records, approximately 500,000 people inhabited the city during this period. This was a substantial number for the time, but old photographs tell a completely different, deeply unsettling story. The city is empty. Wide boulevards, bridges, and squares capable of accommodating enormous crowds are completely vacant. The long shadow of the Alexander Column suggests that the photograph was captured either in early morning or evening hours. But even accounting for the earliest hour, the emptiness of the streets is astonishing. Where are the coachmen, the merchants, the officials rushing about their business? Where did the inhabitants of this vast metropolis disappear to? Let's travel 400 miles to Moscow, and we encounter a painfully familiar scene. In 1860, the population of the ancient capital also numbered around 500,000. Yet in photographs from that time, we discover the same mysterious void. Grand buildings designed to serve millions stand in deafening silence. It feels as if we are examining gigantic, masterfully constructed but abandoned theatrical sets. This discrepancy gives rise to the central question: where could hundreds of thousands of residents have vanished to? Official history maintains that the populations of these cities grew gradually, starting from the 18th century. Many of the buildings captured in these images were constructed long before the photographs were taken. Why build such grand infrastructure if the cities were practically uninhabited? Perhaps Russian architects simply planned with incredible foresight for centuries ahead. But this explanation seems too convenient for such widespread and haunting silence. Was this merely a strange characteristic of life in the Russian Empire at the time? A mystery unique to these two capitals? Or are we witnessing evidence of a phenomenon that was far more widespread? To find the answer, we must examine what was happening in the rest of the world during the very same period. The mystery of the empty Russian capitals turns out to be just the tip of the iceberg, the visible portion of a much deeper and more comprehensive enigma. Leaving the Russian Empire behind, we embark on a swift journey across the globe, and everywhere we are met with the same inexplicable, eerie silence. Here is Edinburgh, Scotland in the 1840s. Its ancient stone buildings and narrow streets should be filled with noise and activity, but they are silent. Here is Copenhagen, Denmark, during the same period. Orderly building facades look out onto deserted canals and cobblestone streets. Dresden, Germany, 1860. A city famous for its Baroque splendor looks like a majestic museum from which all visitors have suddenly vanished. This phenomenon isn't limited to old Europe. It crosses oceans. Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, 1860. The tropical sun illuminates wide avenues with not a single carriage, not a single pedestrian. Toronto, Canada, 1860. A young city that should be buzzing with the energy of growth is frozen in a strange stillness. Even Athens, the cradle of Western civilization, appears silent and abandoned in photographs from that period. It feels as if some global epidemic of silence swept the planet, causing the inhabitants of huge cities to simply evaporate, leaving behind only the stone evidence of their former presence. But amid this worldwide emptiness, oases of bustling life suddenly appear, and this makes the mystery even more complex. In the very same historical period, London and Paris are the complete opposite. Their streets are crowded with people and horse-drawn carriages. Life is in full swing, creating the chaotic but natural picture of a functioning metropolis. This observation completely shatters the simplest and most obvious explanation. If the issue was a technical feature of early photography, like a long exposure time that couldn't capture moving objects, then we wouldn't see the lively streets of Paris either. The technology was identical, but for some reason, in some cities, it captures bustling life, while in others it captures only dead architecture. Did photographers in Moscow, Dresden, and Toronto enter into some kind of conspiracy waiting for perfect emptiness? Or perhaps the reason lies in something else, something we don't understand. Decades pass, and people finally begin to appear in photographs of these once empty cities. It seems that life is returning to normal, but here, the mystery is not resolved. It only deepens to a new, more profound level, a new, far more striking contrast emerges. This new dissonance is no longer about the absence of people, but about their clear incompatibility with the world they inhabit. In the images, we see people in simple, sometimes primitive clothing. They travel in crude carts on muddy, unpaved roads. Their way of life and technology seem unsophisticated, and these people exist against a backdrop of incredible, gigantic, and majestic buildings, stunning in the complexity of their architecture and engineering. This gives rise to a new, more fundamental question that flows from this spectacle. It is the question of the astonishing contrast between the creators and their creations. When the cities cease to be empty, one mystery is replaced by another, one that is deeper and more disturbing. A piercing dissonance arises that is impossible to ignore. In historical photographs, we see people whose appearance and lifestyles seem utterly simple. They are dressed in rough clothing. Their faces reflect the hardships of daily life, and their main mode of transportation is the primitive horse-drawn cart. These carts get stuck in the mud of unpaved, broken roads that look more like country tracks than the streets of great cities. And these very same people, who look like ants against the backdrop of their creations, exist in the shadow of giant, grandiose structures, buildings that are the pinnacle of architectural and engineering thought, astonishing in their complexity, elegance, and scale. This contrast between humanity and its environment is so striking that it casts doubt on the very foundations of official history. How could people, whose technology didn't even allow them to build proper roads, erect such masterpieces? How could they create architecture that inspires awe even today and seems almost impossible to replicate? Let's focus on one specific example known to the entire world: the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. According to the official story, its construction took place in 2 stages from 1806 to 1836. It is a colossal structure made of nearly 37,000 cubic meters of limestone and weighing over 95,000 tons, 95 million kilograms of stone. And right away, the first inconvenient question arises: a question of logistics. How could such an incredible amount of building material be transported using only the horse-drawn carts we see in photographs from that time? It would have required a continuous stream of thousands upon thousands of carts moving along those same muddy and uneven roads. The scale of this task seems completely disproportionate to the transportation capabilities of the era. But logistics is just the beginning. A much more complex question concerns technology. Look at the 4 massive sculptural groups that adorn the arch, the complexity of their patterns and ornaments. Every element, every detail is repeated with perfect mathematical precision without the slightest error or irregularity. Now look at the ceiling of the arch. Flawless 3-dimensional sculptural carvings, perfect geometric symmetry, incredible detail in every petal and pattern. All of this is astounding in its complexity and perfection. Official history tells us this was all done by hand using primitive tools. But is that possible? The first real electric drill capable of simplifying such work was patented in 1889, more than half a century after the arch was completed. To create this by hand with such precision and on such a scale seems like a task beyond the human capabilities of that time. And finally, a third strange fact. In a photograph taken about 40 years after the official completion of construction, the surface of the arch is already noticeably damaged. The stone has undergone significant erosion with visible chips and cracks. This condition suggests that the structure is much older than we are told. A 40-year period is too short a time for such noticeable decay of durable limestone. The arch looks as if it has stood not for decades, but for centuries, surviving more than one generation. Paris and its Arc de Triomphe are just one, albeit very vivid, example of this global contradiction. But what if we look at other structures around the world? Those that challenge not only the technology of the 19th century, but also modern logic and even our capabilities today. What if there are many more of these impossible artifacts and they all tell the same silent story? The Parisian enigma is not an exception, but merely one link in a long chain of architectural anomalies scattered across the globe. These impossible artifacts of the 19th century and earlier eras stand as silent witnesses to a technological dissonance that official history prefers to ignore. Each of these objects raises the same uncomfortable question: how was this built? Let's return to Moscow, to Red Square. Here stands St. Basil's Cathedral, a fantastical, almost unreal structure. Officially, it was built between 1555 and 1561. It is made of thousands of red bricks and crowned with its famous onion domes created from wrought iron that was bent into highly complex shapes. And here a technological paradox arises. How in the 16th century did craftsmen manage to shape metals so skillfully, achieving perfect precision, symmetry, and structural integrity? If the builders possessed such advanced metalwork technologies for their time, why was the reality around them so primitive? Why were the roads next to the Kremlin walls a muddy mess through which carts struggled to move? The technological gap between the complexity of the cathedral and the squalor of the infrastructure is simply enormous. Now let's jump to London in the mid-19th century. There stood the Crystal Palace, a gigantic structure of glass and iron built for the Great Exhibition of 1851. It was a colossal structure, larger in area than many city blocks. It was built from thousands of tons of iron and nearly 100,000 square meters of glass. And this was before the advent of mass-produced sheet glass. How was it possible to manufacture, transport, and assemble such an incredible amount of fragile material in such a short time using manual labor and primitive machinery? The Crystal Palace seems like a miracle, decades, if not a century, ahead of its time. Across the ocean in the United States, at the beginning of the 20th century, 40 years before the widespread use of electric tools, the old Pennsylvania Station was built in New York City. The scale of this building is simply mind-boggling. Each octagonal pattern on its vaulted ceilings was larger than a human figure. Giant columns topped with detailed acanthus leaves supported ceilings at a dizzying height. We are told that this architectural giant was built in just 6 years. 6 years. Even with modern cranes, concrete blocks, and all the power of construction technology, erecting a similar structure today would be an immensely complex task, requiring vast resources and time. Could this have been done by people who were just beginning to master steam power, and whose main tools were the pickaxe, the shovel, and muscle power? Similar examples can be found everywhere. In Tallinn, Estonia, a huge arch of pure limestone was erected in the 1830s, but the streets next to it remained unpaved and mired in mud. In Germany stands the Frauenkirche in Dresden, a magnificent work of architecture that starkly contrasts with the poor and simple appearance of the people around it. The Library of Parliament in Ottawa, Canada, which took 17 years to build, looks as if it were cut out of old Europe and pasted into a new continent for a population that barely exceeded 20,000 people when construction began. Official historians have found a convenient term for all this incredible architecture: historicism. They explain that it was merely an imitation of the great styles of the past: Greco-Roman, Gothic, Renaissance. But this explanation raises even more questions. Can a copy be more complex, grander, and more perfect than the original? Could 19th century builders, by simply imitating, surpass the masters of ancient Rome, or medieval architects without possessing their knowledge and technologies, which may have been long lost? This version seems unconvincing, like an attempt to hide a great mystery behind a convenient label. All these disparate facts, from empty cities to technologically impossible buildings, form a single picture that is very different from the one drawn for us in textbooks. And the most crushing blow to the official version comes from the story of one American city, which, according to documents, arose from practically nothing and in a matter of years became one of the greatest metropolises in the world. If the previous examples were individual acts in a play of historical inconsistency, then the story of San Francisco is its stunning finale. The crowning argument that calls the entire official narrative into question. Here we are not just dealing with a single building, but with the birth of an entire metropolis, which, according to documents, happened with an incredible, almost supernatural speed. Let's go back to 1846. On the site of the future giant of the West Coast lies the tiny settlement of Yerba Buena. It is a wild, practically undeveloped land. Its entire population is about 500 Mormon settlers. It's not a city, but rather a remote outpost of civilization. Now, let's fast forward just 31 years to 1877. Before us is a panoramic photograph of a huge, mature, and monumental city. This is no longer a settlement, but a full-fledged metropolis sprawling for many miles. Its architectural landscape is breathtaking. Gothic spires of cathedrals reach for the sky, The facades of regal buildings are adorned with massive Greco-Roman colonnades. Majestic domes rise above the dense urban fabric. The city's gates appear incredibly massive. This is not a chaotic jumble of buildings, but a harmonious, planned ensemble of the most complex architecture. And at this moment, simple arithmetic comes into direct conflict with history. The official version states that the catalyst for growth was the California gold rush of 1848 to 1849. The population did indeed begin to grow at an explosive rate, increasing from 1,000 to 25,000 in just a couple of years. And by the time of the panoramic photograph, it had reached 200,000. But who were these people? The vast majority were adventurers, farmers, and common laborers obsessed with the dream of getting rich quick. They were not thousands of highly skilled architects, engineers, sculptors, and stonemasons who suddenly arrived in the Wild West with ready-made blueprints and technologies. Let's ask a simple question. Can a society that grew from practically nothing to 200,000 people in 30 years, consisting mainly of unskilled settlers, build a city of this scale and complexity? And do it without electricity, without modern construction cranes, without factory-produced building materials, and without a developed logistics network? Erecting even one of these buildings today would be a monumental project. Yet here, in 3 decades, an entire city full of such masterpieces rose from nothing. This speed of construction seems absolutely fantastical. It defies not only common sense but the laws of physics and economics. But the most astonishing part is yet to come. When we turn away from the shocking pace of construction and look again at the panorama of this incredible city in 1811, we return to the very first mystery with which our investigation began. The city is completely empty. In the photograph of this gigantic, supposedly bustling metropolis, there is not a single living soul. No people, no carts, no smoke from the chimneys. An absolute deafening silence frozen in stone. The shadow of a post in the foreground indicates that it is not early morning. The sun is already high, and at midday such a city should be overflowing with life. But there is no one in the photograph. The only living creature that can be discerned is a lone horse standing on the street. Where is its owner? Could the city authorities have ordered 200,000 residents to stay home, not to go out on the streets, just so someone could take a single picture? Such a version seems absurd. And so, the circle is complete. We see facts that do not fit into a single logical picture. We have photographic evidence that directly contradicts the official historical version. The pictures do not lie. They impartially record reality as it was. And this reality shows us empty cities of incredible beauty, later populated by people technologically incapable of building them. It shows us a metropolis that grew out of a wild land in 30 years. What then is truly wrong with the official story? We have reached the end of our investigation, the point where all the scattered threads weave together into a single knot of contradictions, forming what can be called the Great Divide in the official historical record. It is a deep fissure between the picture of the past we are asked to accept on faith and what was impartially captured by early photography. Everything we have seen can be distilled into 3 fundamental groups of facts that are in constant conflict with one another. The first group is the phenomenon of empty cities. We saw it in St. Petersburg and Moscow, in Edinburgh and Dresden, in Toronto, and even in San Francisco. In the same historical period, the mid-19th century, metropolises around the world appear in photographs as majestic but lifeless stage sets. This is not an isolated incident, not the whim of a single photographer, but a global pattern. Official science either ignores this fact or offers unconvincing explanations about the technical limitations of photography, explanations that, as we saw with the example of a bustling Paris, do not stand up to scrutiny. This worldwide silence is the first part of the great mystery. The second group of facts is the flagrant technological gap. When people finally appear on these streets, an even stronger dissonance emerges. We see a society whose technological peak is the steam engine and the horse-drawn cart. Their life is simple, their tools are primitive, their infrastructure, especially their roads, is in a deplorable state. And these very people are declared the builders of cathedrals with perfect geometry, palaces with gigantic columns, impossibly large train stations, and bridges that are marvels of engineering. The gulf between the developmental level of the society and the complexity of the architecture surrounding it is so vast that it forces us to doubt their cause and effect relationship. They look more like inheritors who stumbled upon and settled these cities rather than their creators. And finally, the third group of facts, which crowns this pyramid of the impossible, is the fantastical pace of construction. The story of San Francisco serves as the most vivid and irrefutable proof here. The transformation of a wilderness with a population of a few hundred into a monumental metropolis in 30 years is a scenario that is impossible even with modern technology, let alone the capabilities of the 19th century. This construction miracle compresses centuries of architectural evolution into the span of a single generation, which defies all logic and common sense. Official history asks us to overlook these contradictions. It asks us to simply believe that's how it was, that ordinary people with hammers and chisels manually created masterpieces beyond the reach of modern machines, that they transported millions of tons of stone on carts through mud, that they built giant cities from scratch in a matter of years. But the evidence left to us, unknowingly, by the photographers of the 19th century, screams the opposite. They had no intention of exposing anything. They were simply doing their job, documenting the world around them, and in the process, they unwittingly captured a great secret, the traces of a civilization incomparable to the one that succeeded it. These images are not just pictures from the past, they are irrefutable evidence. They call everything into question. If we accept the official version, we must admit that our ancestors were titans, capable of working wonders with primitive tools, yet for some reason unwilling to build even decent roads for themselves. But if we dare to trust our own eyes and logic, we inevitably arrive at the final, ultimate question. If the people we see in these photographs and their ancestors could not have built these incredible structures because it is simply physically and technologically impossible, then who did? And what happened to these true builders? Where did the civilization that possessed knowledge and capabilities that we perhaps cannot comprehend even today disappear to? This question remains unanswered, and it is this question that transforms old faded photographs into a portal to one of the greatest mysteries in human history.